Good afternoon. My name is Martin Wilson and I'm a police officer seconded into the North East Business Resilience Centre. And welcome to our first of many webinars. This webinar is about SME cybersecurity, and joining us very shortly, I'll hand over to is Morton from TecSec, who's one of the NEBRC's trusted partners. The North East Business Resilience Centre is a non-for-profit centre that's been set up. It's a collaboration between policing, academia and private sector businesses, and our sole ethos is trying to make cybersecurity affordable, manageable and practical for small businesses in our area. So now I'll hand over to Morton. Morton, thank you very much for being part of this webinar today, and let's have a discussion around SME cybersecurity.
Lovely. Thank you, Martin. Thank you for the introduction. So yes, I'm Morton Bell from TecSec Services. We're an MSP with a cybersecurity bent to us, covering risk management and governance. We're based in Sheffield, and as Martin kindly said, we're a trusted partner of the NEBRC. So I've been asked just to do a presentation to sort of outline some of the key areas that we think that SMEs are likely to face over the next 12 months, and I will do my best to do it. It's the first webinar we've done and we're all a bit new to this, so forgive us if it's slightly iffy. If you'd like to know any more about anything that we say in this, then our details will be available either through the NEBRC, or you can come to our website, tecsec.co.uk, or contact me directly, and we can always have a discussion. What are the challenges that businesses are likely to face over the next 12 months and going forwards? It may sound obvious, but the biggest problem is cybercrime and the growth of cybercrime. It is a huge growth market, and the skills and cunning being put into play by the cyber criminals gets bigger and stronger and better day by day. And one thing that I want to try and rule out of people's minds right at the outset is that cybercrime is targeting big business. It doesn't target big business. It is a complete myth. It's also a myth that cybercrime is performed by individuals sitting there hacking away on a computer and trying to get into a specific computer, looking at yours specifically. That does happen, but it's a very, very, very small percentage. Cybercrime in itself is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It employs millions of computers worldwide. It takes those computers over without the owners knowing that it's done it to a large extent. It has software programs running, and it has some humans, but far fewer humans than it does computers and software programs. So don't think that it won't hit you. It applies equally to a one-man band right the way up to a multinational company. So the most common attacks that we're seeing and that seem to be really prevalent are anything that is connected to the internet. That's really the crux of where your problems come from, but also you can't live without it. So what we've got to look at is how we make sure that we don't fall foul of common mistakes around protecting those devices that are connected to the internet, and to make sure they are not, as we say in IT, vulnerable. So we all understand the word vulnerable, and hopefully this will explain a little bit more about that within IT speak. There are several ways that people will attack in companies that are out there, and they are companies that do this. They do it through phishing, and they do it through vulnerabilities within people's devices. So that might be through sending out mass emails to completely untargeted lists of people, which then get onto people's devices because you inadvertently click on it, you click a link that you shouldn't, and you download something that you shouldn't. And sometimes you do that even without realizing you've done it. Once that software, once that malware has got onto your device, it can propagate from there and get out onto other devices. Now, I'm talking very much at a high level because I couldn't personally go into all the details of the minutiae of how it does that, but also it wouldn't be productive for the purposes of this conversation. But what I can say is that every business is a target, no matter the size. I think, Martin, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head when you consider that basically we are now more interconnected than what we've ever been. And what is the internet? At its most basic level, it's a whole load of computers talking to each other. They talk to each other through IP addresses. We all have an IP address. And therefore, what the bad guys tend to do is they scan huge ranges of IP addresses, looking for weaknesses. So that's one of the main techniques and tactics they employ, and they've been doing it more so when, because of the global pandemic, we find ourselves moving to things online. In relation to phishing emails, I won't steal too much of Morton's thunder, but absolutely, that's, I think, 86% of some of the latest research suggests that all cyber attacks feature a phishing email. So that's 3/4, and that's over a 12-month period. So really, it's really, really important that we up our game around phishing emails.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I was going to go on to is to talk a little bit around phishing, and thank you for mentioning that it's such a hugely prevalent malware. It has become much more popular and much more utilized by the bad actors during the COVID pandemic. That's been unquestionable. And a lot of it is focused around the CEO fraud. So this is, there are the various different types of phishing, but quite often we'll see now clients receiving emails that appear to come from somebody within their organization or a known person to them. It might be a known person in another company. And that email requests that they do something, and it's written in a language that sounds very much like it's come from that person. And the request is quite often a request that in its basic form looks completely normal, and clients are therefore following that advice or that request within an email. So an example we've seen of this is where they hack a company's email. They then start controlling invoices that go out. Before the invoice is sent out, they're changing the details on the invoice so that the bank details are changed. They sometimes send an email saying, by the way, we've changed our bank details. Here is the invoice. Could you please make sure that you make the payment to the correct invoice? That's quite a common one. We see others where it's asking people to buy vouchers, for instance, for a managing director. I'm out and about, I'm busy, I need to get these vouchers. Could you possibly purchase them and send me the links so that I can grab them when I land in the hotel this evening or when I get back this evening? It's that kind of language, and they're much less specific, so that you don't know whether it's real or it isn't. And it's only by knowing how to identify what is and what isn't a real phishing email, or what is or isn't a phishing email, that people can not fall foul of this. So knowing what one looks like and understanding how to look for it is very, very important. And I'll come on to that again in a little while. As I say, the accuracy of these emails is increasing. The language that's used and the methodology that's used is getting better. They are constantly mutating and helping themselves to evade detection, either by anti-malwares or firewalls or etc. So it's very, very clever, and it's constantly getting better. It only takes one member of your staff to click on one of those emails and make a mistake for them to then be in a dominant position, be that because they put ransomware on, be that because they're then going to use your services to propagate their malware out to other companies and people within your organization. So your staff are really a very key element to protecting your business. And if you don't have staff and you're a sole trader, well, it's you understanding this subject really, really well for yourself. We mentioned earlier that the pandemic and the COVID-19 has seen a massive increase. And I think a large part of that is around the fact that people are having to adapt to work from home. And that home working has brought lots of challenges. It's brought lots of benefits, arguably. But those challenges are being met in ways that companies haven't had to do that before. And sometimes that brings in vulnerabilities. So we've talked about vulnerabilities. I've talked about phishing. So to talk about a vulnerability a little bit more specifically and away from phishing, there's been a huge increase in the number of technical vulnerabilities that are being exploited. And by that, we mean a piece of software or a piece of firmware on somebody's device that has within it some small element that is a chink in the armor that the malware can get through. And the cyber criminals are constantly trying to find these vulnerabilities. And when they do, they then scour the internet looking for anybody who has a device connected that may have that vulnerability open. So a very good example of that has been recently with Microsoft Exchange. They had a vulnerability which allowed a particular method of attack on Exchange to put web shells onto Exchange servers. That then, once they'd proven they could do that, they started putting more and more vulnerabilities into it and more malware, which then took over the entirety of Exchange. It's still out there. This is very, very new. It was the 2nd of March. This was publicly announced by Microsoft. And that can take over the entirety of the Exchange server, but it can take over the entirety of the network. And it's really because there is this vulnerability which needs patching. The patch has been released and people are putting it in place, but even if you put that patch in place, you may already have the malware on your Exchange server. And so we'd very much recommend that you get that checked. You get possibly some help with pen testing, vulnerability testing, just to make sure that you remove that malware once it's on, because it does hide and it's very difficult to detect. So that's a vulnerability that's very live at the moment. What do they do with this once they've attacked you? Well, I mentioned ransomware. So they lock down your whole system, causing you to cease work because you cannot work because your system is locked. And then they ask you to pay a ransom, which is in effect blackmail. Other people are using the same malwares to just purely blackmail you and say, we have a web shell on your server, we have it on your Exchange, and we have your information. If you don't pay us, we won't release you from that, and we will keep that information and leak it to whoever we feel like leaking it to. So these are the things that we're all trying to avoid. And I know this probably sounds like the big scare tactic, and it might sound sort of very negative, but the idea is that we want to try and help you to protect yourselves. So that's a couple of things around a particular area. We can then move on to RDP. Lots of people are using RDP to enable home working. A lot of people are using Microsoft 365 and Teams, as we are today. So RDP is a method of accessing one computer from another, taking it over, which is a very useful tool, and lots of people are doing it to connect into their office. But it is a vulnerable tool, and there have been plenty of vulnerabilities on it, so it does need to be patched. Similarly, Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 have had huge numbers of attacks on them. We've heard that RDP has had a rise in 40% usage since the COVID-19 pandemic began, and that is with people obviously needing to be able to access the office. But that increase in the number of people using it also makes it more of a target for the RDP malware people to attack it. So how can you get around it? Well, it needs to be properly configured if you're using RDP, and you need to make sure it's patched, and you should do it very much in conjunction with other tools such as firewall and anti-malware. 365 and Teams, just to give you an idea about how much that's being used, it increased by 180 million users, I understand, in 12 months. But just with every other software, there are vulnerabilities in it. And that has led to Microsoft having to create over 1,000 patches in 9 months, purely to look after Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365. So those are all vulnerabilities that have been identified. The scams that are out there are legion. There are things that you will see that are much simpler, much more normal scams, things like emails from people purporting to be from HMRC or phishing emails around coronavirus and fake charities asking you to donate. The Crown Prosecution Service has been hit by it. The DWP scam is one where people are coming to you and saying you're eligible for a tax rebate. And we know there've been lots and lots of rebates given by the government. So these things are things that people expect to see. They want to stay on top of it. They want to make sure they're getting all of the help they can do during this difficult time. But the problem is people are falling foul of fake emails around that. So those are things that really you've got to be very much aware of and know what you're looking for. I've had them personally where people have phoned me and said, oh, we're phoning about the problem on your computer. Are you at your computer at the moment? And I say yes. And who are you? And they say, well, we're from Microsoft and we're aware that you've got this problem. Now, it all sounds very obvious if I do it now in the cold light of day, but to somebody who's not completely savvy or with it, that could be a very real issue that makes them think, I need to do something. So you just have to be aware. And I think, Martin, have you got any stats that demonstrate anything around this tool?
What I would say, broadly speaking, is that the sort of top 3 crime types, if you like, of cybercrime. So say the top 3 different types of cybercrime that are going to affect businesses hasn't really changed over the last 3 or 4 years. So phishing's always been an issue. RDP exploitation's always been an issue. What you tend to find is that the criminals will either not change it because they know it works, or they'll make some slight tweaks to how these scams are iterated. So as an example, if British Airways suffered some sort of incident, you might find that actually suddenly that the bad guys are sending out phishing emails pretending to be British Airways, pretending to give a refund. It just so happens now, because of what the most current news story in the world is now is COVID, that those scams are weaved into the phishing emails to either get you to click on a link or open up an attachment. We've definitely seen more of the RDP port stuff. So bad guys are going after the RDP port more, looking for unpatched stuff, looking to see if there are any default passwords and stuff like that on there. Why are they doing that more? Because they know that we are using it more, because we are working from home more. So ultimately, whatever it is that we are doing more of, or what it is that we're doing in business, the bad guys will get wind of that and try and exploit that in some way, shape or form. Back over to you, Morton.
Yeah, thank you. So I suppose what we need to do really is think about what businesses can do to protect themselves and to prevent these attacks. And there are some very basic, inexpensive actions you can take. There are 2 key ones that I'm going to recommend. The first one is around the 5 key technical controls. And those controls are firewalls, secure configuration, user access control, malware protection, and patch management. So anybody who knows Cyber Essentials well will know that those are the 5 key controls around Cyber Essentials. If you don't know Cyber Essentials, then log on to our website, the NEBRC or IASME, and you can read all about that. But it's the government standard for cybersecurity. What are those? They are all controls that will help you to protect your business. Locking down various elements of your business will really help. And what those key controls are, if I just give a very brief explanation, the secure configuration is referring to your computers and other devices that are on your network and helping to reduce any vulnerabilities associated with those devices and their access to the internet and everything else. User access control is who can access the device. And do they have the right access? Do they have unique logins, passwords, etc.? And do they only have the access that they need for their role? Malware protection is possibly a new term to some of you. It's in old speak antivirus, but it's a much more progressive tool now than it ever used to be, malware protection, and that's very, very key. And then finally, and probably most importantly, and certainly most often overlooked, is patch management. We've talked about RDP, we've talked about Exchange and the exploit that's happening in that at the moment. If you are patching your devices and your software against these vulnerabilities, you're going to block a lot of the problems, which is really very critical. Now, it's not easy to do, and to be fair, you probably need to have help on a regular basis doing that. You certainly ought to be staying current. But if you were to do cyber essentials, these things that we've just mentioned are things that you are covering within that, and you would expect that to cover you from about 80% of the most common threats that you're going to experience. Plus, a big benefit is you get £25,000 worth of a total limit of indemnity for cyber insurance, which is good in anybody's book, to be honest. It's not an expensive thing to put in place, and I'd strongly recommend that if you are interested, you talk to NEBRC, ourselves, or anybody else who's an official certification body for that. Certainly, there's a second one, and that is security awareness training. We've talked about how the vulnerabilities can be exposed by members of staff clicking on the wrong thing and giving access in a moment of weakness, if you like. That is particularly prevalent working from home because of the distractions of working from home. In the office, you've got your colleagues around you, you've got a buzz of the office, your mindset is very much on work. At home, although you might be productive and you might work well, there is often a concern that people are distracted by the things around them in a non-work environment, be that other family members, pets, the deliveries guy from Amazon turning up, or whatever that might be, the washing machine whirring in the background. So having security awareness training, which is not expensive, putting that in place, it just keeps you aware of these problems, and it's a drip feed to keep you constantly on your mettle and knowing how to protect yourself. More practical things are making sure that you're using a headset when you're working in a public environment, so that people can't hear the conversation you're having. They can hear one side, yes, but not both. Making sure people can't see your screen. And lots of these things that are simple, practical things are not only good for protecting yourself as a business, but also makes working for your staff a more comfortable thing. And it's an investment in them being able to work better. So while there's a lot of negatives, if you look at the positives, you can pull out of this ways of working which will secure your business, give you more flexibility, and help you to be protected from these problems that we see on a daily basis. And that includes with people returning to work. So, and obviously you've then got to throw in things like furloughing staff and people coming back, and who has access to what, and have they been taken off access, put onto access, are they using a laptop which they weren't using before, etc. So all of those things need to be covered. It will also help you very much with disaster recovery, because a lot of the home working really is just a disaster recovery implementation, or should be. And now is really the best time to do it for many reasons. We've got the whole of the pandemic as a problem, which should be asking people to look at these things. But if you're going to invest money in it, investing now to protect yourselves is a good thing. It also increases flexibility. And I don't think there could be a better time with the government's super deduction, which is a tax relief of 130%. So very much the right time to be investing. So in summary, there are a lot of things to cover yourself against. It's actually relatively simple and not too expensive to do. But you probably need a little bit of technical support and help, which again, NEBRC, ourselves, or one of the other TPs would be able to help you with that. I think I'm going to have to wrap up there because it's a big subject and we haven't got enough time to cover everything. But Martin, is there anything else I need to touch on, do you think?
No, not at all. Just to say, there's a couple of Q&As that have been coming in, and I've been answering those as we've come along. I'll just highlight on one from Glyn Smith, if we've got the time, that's asking around, is there risk in opening the email, or is it opening the link of the attachment? The risk lies very much in the email and attachment, Glyn. And I guess this comes to a wider point around defence in depth and cybersecurity. So if you look at ransomware as an example that may be delivered via email, what you may have in place is a spam filter, or if you're with somebody like Microsoft, they'll do a level of filtering to try and make sure that email doesn't reach you. Then what it comes down to, which is Morton's alluded to, is what's the savvy like within your organisation? The person that's encountering that email, Are they going to click on the link or not? Are they going to fall for the scam if it's something that's really obvious? Hopefully that they wouldn't. But say then they do click on that link, so the spam filter hasn't worked, your user education hasn't worked, and the ransomware comes in, it then becomes about actually, well, the other layer of the onion, defense in depth, is what's your backup like? Where is that? Is it separate from the system? Can you then restore to a backup that's uninfected, so you're not having to either pay a ransom and you're not losing any data? So for me, as well as the good stuff that Morton's touched on, depending on where you are in your business journey, the NCSC Small Business Guide is something that's really useful to have a look at. Breaks it down into layman's terms, and phishing is one of the 5 components of that. Right, you should be able to see those contact details there, and please do get in touch with any questions about this webinar, outside this webinar, how TecSec or the NEBRC can help you.